1875, a ship of stone set to sea, and the water kept the mold. In October 1875, the yard on the Delaware smelled of wet sand and iron. Men trundled barrows toward a wooden mold ribbed like a whale's cage, where a foreman tapped the planks and said the word that made priests laugh: concrete. Portland cement, river gravel, hair from a tannery, anything that strengthened the paste was invited. A ledger listed charges with neat suspicion: 2 cart shells, 1 bucket lint, prayers, none. On a sawhorse lay an iron nameplate blank as a kept secret. A boy chalked a trial name on a shutter, Atlantus, then smaller, as if humility would help it float. Engineer Pike believed that stone could float if you taught it voids. He sketched hollows like lungs, bulkheads like ribs, a keel that was only absence. His notebook smelled of lime and rain. The mold took its coats slowly. The slurry trembled as if it remembered rivers. When frost came, they tented the hull and kept braziers glowing under tarpaulins. The flame walked grey plains in orange saints. They tested pieces, buckets, planks, coffers, each dunked in a horse trough, each obediently buoyant. The men laughed until the widest panel lifted and should not have, rocking like a gravestone that had learned manners. Pike tapped the shell with a hammer and counted a long, bell-like answer that walked the ribs and ended somewhere he could not point to on the plan. At midnight, the watch stepped close and found fingertip marks pressed along an inner frame. 4, then a pause, then 2, too high for ordinary reach. He noted it in the log and rubbed the place. The marks stayed shallow and sure. They poured the deck late, snow vanishing in fresh edges like small agreements. At last, the nameplate took letters hammered backward, then cast. When they unclamped it, the raised word shone dull as pewter: Atlantus. The boy touched it and flinched. The metal was cold as if kept outside in a colder country. In the office, the ledger's ink dried with a pale halo, and the foreman added a line he could not justify. Launch when the river allows stone. They launched at slack water with the tide holding its breath. The ways were greased with tallow, ropes laid out like clauses. Men in caps lined the bank beside barrels of sand in case the river remembered physics too late. Pike stood in the bow of a skiff with a boat hook, face chalked from cement dust and worry. "Let her go," the foreman said, and the wedges answered with small wooden screams. The hull slid, paused, considered, then took the river the way a heavy thought takes air. Slowly, then all at once. A ripple lifted and ran under the ice fringes. Barrels bobbed afoot and laughed against their staves. Atlantis sat lower than wood, higher than rumor. Water lines chalked on the fresh gray shone like a ruler's smile. The pump crew watched the bilge. The tally showed only a civil seep. The engine, a hired portable, coughed through its belt and spun the prop in test, the river replying with a patient tug. The wake came out milky, as if the hull were writing in the river in a hand the current could almost read. On the stern, someone nailed the nameplate with unnecessary ceremony. The letters looked heavier than their metal. They made a proving run between the shipyard and the marsh islands. The compass behaved, then sulked, then agreed. The horn answered itself in the sloughs. A deckhand pressed his ear to the bulkhead and heard a low ringing like a spoon against stone. Pike logged speeds, headings, a list of small promises and one unease. He heat rise in frame 4, although sun absent. At dusk they moored to a dolphin, and the river laid a thin frost on the grey. Footprints came and went where no one had walked. 3 steps, a halt, and none away. The watch raised his lantern and saw nothing but his own breath making treaties with the light. He wrote it down anyway. By morning, the chalky wake traced a pale line downriver, as if the ship had kept moving at night and then politely returned to where rope claimed it. In November, they took Atlantus to sea, down the brown Delaware and out past the break in the Cape, where the water remembers 2 names. The concrete lost its yard smell and learned salt. Spray left white freckles that did not dry. The hired engine pulled with manners. The hull answered as if the ocean were inside it already. Pike watched thermometers wedged into pockets along the inner skin. One rose for no reason except the ship thinking. He wrote that the material exhaled slowly and might keep its own weather. Fog arrived not from horizon but from the deck upward, a low milk that unbuttoned the world. The compass hesitated. The bell forward tolled once and then forgot the word. Sound came thick, gulls like hands rubbing glass, the engine's note clothed in wool. From below, a trimmer reported a sweet, stony smell as if rain had got inside masonry. The bilge showed no mischief. At noon, the nameplate printed damp on a swab as if the word liked to repeat itself. They hove to, then found they were still making way. The wake, pale as chalk water, went forward as well as aft, a tired loop enclosing nothing. Pike tried the helm and the ship consented with dignity. A boy pressed his palm to the bulkhead and felt a beat there. Not engine, not wave. His fingers left dust marks that darkened and then faded as if absorbed. When the fog thinned, they saw a row of posts that ought not be there, as if a wharf had been poured in the wrong part of the sea. Then the posts were gone. The lead gave generous soundings and then nonsense. Night came early, and the light they aimed for answered from 2 directions. At dawn, the log shows a gap and a single ruled line. Steady. The next entry uses a different hand and fewer nouns. See all sides, wake in front, hull warm to touch. Atlantis did not vanish. She kept her appointments 1 more day, but something had chosen her to teach concrete a new verb: to stray. The telegram reached the yard 3 days later. Atlantis overdue, possible grounding near the Cape. Tugs went out with their smoke written small by a northerly. The sea had the look of hammered tin. They found no wreck, only a pale streak on the water like milk spilt in a line, bending toward shoal then away again as if the ship had changed its mind twice. At low tide, a bar showed ridges as regular as shutter slats, then vanished when the tide thought better of it. Divers went down in suits that made them saints of lead and air. Their lines thrummed a cautious music. The first diver reported a floor of firm clay stamped with a name backward, as if a mold had been lifted from it. UTNATLA. He traced the letters with a gloved finger, and the clay held the groove. In the dark, he rang his hammer against something that sounded like a bell made of road. The second diver found compartments in the water, rooms suggested by colder bands and a smell like wet plaster. His slate came up with 6 words. Footsteps impressed inside the concrete. The captain damned the phrase as poetry and called for another sounding. At night, the light ship crew swore they heard a slow knocking under the hull. 12 beats, pause, 12 again, the count of a watch on patient duty. Pike measured currents. The paper curled with damp and drew a loop he did not intend. On the beach, a child picked a pebble pale as bone, flat on one side and bearing in miniature hair-thin lines like handwriting frozen while still wet. The foreman turned it in his palm, pocketed it, and later could not find either. By week's end, the tugs had mapped absence. No spars, no planks, no cargo, nothing wreckers understand. Only the occasional boil of water that left lips dry. The insurance agent wrote, total loss, probable. Pike wrote, presence without body, a deliberate outline. He underlined deliberate and then liked the line less the longer he looked at it. The winter taught patience to rumor. Nets came up with fish tasting faintly of limestone. The women swore the kettles skimmed chalk. On storm mornings, a hard edge appeared beyond the bar like the lid of a buried chest, then sank when the wind turned. A beachcomber found a plate of gray no thicker than a thumbnail printed with the ghost of handwriting, looped backward, sweetly sure, as if a wet letter had set itself in the mix long ago. He wrapped it in sacking and brought it to the foreman, who kept it until it learned to be a stone again. In spring, a pilot cutter struck something that did not give and came away with a smear the color of old churches. Marks along the cutter's copper, red as if dragged through a shallow writing desk. Neat parallel scratches that refused to be barnacle work. A lighthouse keeper wrote that on certain fogs he could see a pale superstructure standing where charts showed depth. When he raised his glass, it fled. The light ship crew admitted the slow knocking returned on even weeks, then denied having admitted it. Pike went back to the yard. He ran new mixes in little coffers, salt water, nails, crushed shells, a shaving of paper. The paper bled upward as if the stone exhaled memory. He wrote to a journal under initials, on the porosity of novel hulls. Replies came in tidy envelopes, applause, disdain, offers of work, far from tides. He stayed and wrote again, smaller. Atlantis, still present. Concrete, once taught us shape by water, may continue to seek it. The editor returned the proof with a pencil mark. Seek. By 1880, the wreck had become a line in a customs ledger. Hazard not always found, and a story for children who went too close to the tide. Fishermen said the bar shifted under a steady hand. A blacksmith fashioned a charm from a fragment, and swore his hammer rang truer. Some nights the river wore a thin white seam, and nobody argued which way the current ran. War required ships faster than trees. In 1918, the papers spoke loudly of concrete hulls, economy by chemistry, and yards along the coast learned to cast ocean into shape. Pike was gone now, but his notebook survived in a drawer that smelled faintly of wet lime. A young draftsman unfolded a brittle sheet and found, beneath the grid for a new freighter, a paler drawing overlaid at a different scale. The name block on the ghost plan carried no date, only a single word in pencil: Atlantus. They built her again because the century liked repetition disguised as invention. The molds were steel now, the mix better tempered, the engine less hired. Launch day crowds watched Grey rise into water and applauded the trick of stone remembering how to float. The name Atlantis shone on the stern in letters that photographed well. At the office, a clerk stamped the file, complete, and arranged coal and a cargo of luck. The new ship served as ships do, briefly and under orders. She rode low and honest. She turned slowly. She resisted rumor. But on some nights, a faint knocking counted watches where no man stood, and the wake chalked a paler seam than other hulls. Once, off the cape, the lookout reported a line of posts where chart showed none. In the morning there were shoals where the line had been. She was later towed to sit as a breakwater and keep other vessels from learning the bottom the hard way. Photographs show her black and gray bones leaning at angles the sea teaches slowly. In the museum case today, a blueprint from 1918 sits beneath glass. If light strikes it as a cloud passes, a second set of lines rises under the first, older, thinner, parted by different bulkheads, and the word Atlantis appears twice, as if the paper had reread itself. Visitors smile at accident and leave believing in layers. Out by the cape, when storms lower and the water goes white, two hulls seem to ride in the same place. One present and broken, one pale and entire, and a little out of register. Now the shore keeps a monument that remembers tides first and history afterwards. The Atlantis lies canted in the surf, her concrete honeycombed to lace, iron skeleton blooming with salt. Tourists photograph her at low water and apply names: wreck, folly, lesson, words that fit until weather speaks again. Gulls use the ribs as punctuation. In certain fogs, a pale duplicate stands a little seaward, a twin made of light, and then, as the fog lifts, chooses to forget itself. In a small room inland, a case holds three things: a fragment the color of winter sky, a core sample polished to show bubbles like captured breath, and a ledger open to a page from 1875. The fragment bears, at a slant, the echo of a line in human script. No ink, just a smoother vein through grit, as if paper had once lain against the mix and persuaded it to remember. The core shows rings where heat once rose in the hull. The ledger records in the foreman's hand, a sentence he later denied. Launch, when the river allows stone. On autumn nights, the breakwater counts to 12 with patient knocks. On others, the surf draws a chalk line along the beach that the tide erases and redraws, always a little off. Children collect pebbles pale as teeth and sometimes find letters on them, backward and shy. A fisherman swears his lead sounds bottom one way, then another, over the same coordinates. Nobody writes that down, so the fact keeps its strength. Stand on the sand at dusk. The sea irons itself. The wreck takes the last light and gives back a dull pewter. No voices. Only rope on stanchion, wave in hollow, and under it, the stony breath of a hole that once taught water a new word. If you stay until the lamps ash the mist, you may see the chalk seam ride out beyond the present remains and close a loop in the dark. Concrete, being honest, remembers its first mold. It waits where river became sea, where a name printed backward in clay still asks to be read forward.